Many of us have experienced it, the devastating effects of a toxic work environment. The culture of the organization seems off, the leadership is distant, and perhaps even domineering. This is not the way God meant organizations to run. From the ancient Old Testament scriptures and to the teachings of Jesus and to his apostles, everything in life is meant to be for universal flourishing, or shalom.
And most of us spend the majority of our lives at work, interacting with team members, suppliers, customers, or clients, and the communities in which we work, live, and play. But there is often that disconnect. Organizations, even organizations headed up by Christians, are too often influenced by secular business models that just disregard the very things that God treasures.
Our guest is Dr. Justin Irving, professor of Christian leadership at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. His newest book is titled Healthy Leadership for Thriving Organizations, Creating Contexts Where People Flourish. In it, he provides theological foundations for healthy Christian leadership in for-profit corporations, nonprofits, and churches. The way of Jesus is for organizations to nurture flourishing individuals and societies. How can Christian business and ministry leaders create positive organizational culture and identity? Let's find out. Here is our interview with Justin Irving.
Well, thanks for joining us on the podcast, Justin. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thanks, David. It's a joy to be with y'all.
So, you've been studying, teaching, and reflecting on organizational leadership for 2 decades. So, this new book provides even more research into the theological foundations for healthy Christian leadership, whether it be for-profit corporations, nonprofits, or churches. So, what was the methodology for writing this book?
Hmm. Well, kind of to your initial point, I have been thinking about leadership, particularly some of the organizational dimensions of leadership in the classroom for, over 20 years now. And I just am eager to try to provide helpful resources for folks that are thinking about that area. That led me to trying to do some research with those who are serving kind of at that top role within organizations. So in businesses, it might be a CEO or a vice president type role. Could be an executive director in a nonprofit, a lead pastor in a local church. Lots of different kinds of leaders that are serving in some of those top roles. And I wanted to hear from them. And so was able to interact with about 216 executive level leaders, just asking them two basic questions about what are the primary challenges or issues that they face, and what were some of their primary recommendations. So as I'm trying to work with students, and by extension, as I'm interacting with folks through this book project, I'm wanting them not just to hear my voice on the question of what makes for effective and faithful and healthy leadership, but I want them to hear from the wisdom of these leaders who are practicing it on a daily basis. So I was really, really thankful that there was a foundation to work from, of those voices of those leaders, and then try to bring that wisdom together with wisdom from biblical and theological reflection and wisdom from the general organizational leadership literature, to try to get some practical insights and perspectives for practice for those who are engaged in leading important communities.
Yeah, so it kind of reminded me of my qualitative research that I had to do for my dissertation. I mean, you ask the same questions, and then you kept on saying in the book, these people are saying these kinds of things, and these people are saying these kinds of things. I remember having Post-it notes all over my kitchen table. I think these things go together, these things go together. Well, most of the book discusses the various things that Christian organizational leaders do. You start out by setting the stage with a foundational principle that God has created a world in which human flourishing is central. What is the biblical teaching of flourishing?
There's lots of different ways we could kind of engage or approach that question. I think in one way, I'm looking at some of the primary Old Testament and New Testament language that is adjacent to what we might call human flourishing. So in the Old Testament, we might refer to things such as shalom. In New Testament, we think of ideas of blessedness. In fact, one of my colleagues here at the institution where I teach, Jonathan Pennington, he even thinks that that word that's often translated blessedness in the Sermon on the Mount can really just be referred to as flourishing. It's a pronouncement of flourishing. So, what is flourishing? I think of flourishing primarily as being in right relationship with God, right relationship with the people in our lives, and right relationship with the world within which God has placed us. And as we have that sense of what does it mean to be in right relationship with God, with the people around us, with the world around us, it means that we have to ask the question, what is the purpose for which God has created these people or the world that we are working with? And how are we seeking to engage the world around us, the people around us, not just in ways that we're using them for our benefit, or for trying to build up our own mini empires, but how are we working with people in a way that is joining God in his work with these people and places, trying to facilitate his purposes? I think that's a lot of what flourishing is about. His intent for the people that we're working with. What is he seeking to do in terms of making them to be the people that he has called them to be and to do the things that he has called them to do? We get a picture of that, of course, in the first couple chapters of the Bible, where we have a vision of what does it mean to be in right relationship with God and others in the world around us. But of course, there's a quick fall from flourishing in the narrative of Scripture, and the remainder of Scripture, in many ways, is a journey of telling us of this pathway of how we can move towards a redemption and ultimate restoration back to this vision of human flourishing. And so we can look to the bookends of the Bible as sort of the ideal pictures of human flourishing. And in between Genesis 1 and 2 and Revelation 21 and beyond, that it's how that's being worked out in our lives, of trying to return to the place that we were meant to be, return to the people that we were meant to be in Christ. That's a little bit of how I think about flourishing, but that language of being in right relationship with is kind of a dominant way I think of flourishing applied to our lives here in the world.
People spend most of their waking hours at work. And so organizational leaders, Christian organizational leaders especially, are called to lead their organizations in such a way that the people that work there are actually flourishing. The first thing is that an organizational leader has to be good as a personal leader. There's a lot of books out there that help develop personal leadership. Some are based on a set of skills to master, while others, like the interview we just did a couple of months ago with Uli Chi, focuses on the developing of a leader's wisdom. You have a chapter talking about the commitments of healthy organizational leaders, which is helpful, but most of the book is more interested in leading an organization, something not many books are dealing with. You have a section on cultivating healthy teams in an organization. You believe that leaders who are not relational and who actually do not value people have real trouble creating good teams in an organization.
Yeah, that certainly is a conviction that I have, and in some ways, much of what you just laid out there in terms of healthy teams and practice and organizational leadership in general is grounded in the pathway or logic that I think healthy leaders are able to contribute to thriving organizations, which create contexts within which people can flourish. So we're tying back to some of the theology that we just talked about there, that the kind of a telos in life is a telos that's moving us towards a place of flourishing. And I think God is working through people and through organizations. You talked about most of our waking hours are working. I don't think that is to be treated as a side aspect of life, just something we have to do because of the fall. We have to do because we have to pay mortgages or rent and put food on the table. I think actually God wants to do something through the majority of those waking hours that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And when we lean into what does it mean for leaders to be healthy, facilitating followers and teams who are healthy, I think that kind of aspect helps to create organizations where there is a thriving and healthy work environment that leads to an organization that's actually contributing value to the world around them through products and services, whatever those might be, that in turn also creates a context within which the employees of that organization and the people that are served by that organization can experience flourishing. So it's a little bit like flourishing is on both ends of it, right? Healthy people are really behind the work of creating thriving organizations, which in turn creates a context within which they themselves and the people they serve can experience health and flourishing as well. So, health begets health, and so we have to think about that when it comes to teams. Yes, relationships do matter. And it's kind of fascinating to dig into some of the leadership literature on that phrase. Actually, even back in the 1950s, there was a management thinker by the name of Robert Kotz who was looking at kind of skill-based approaches. Is it more about technical skills or conceptual skills? And he made some interesting insights about those who are at sort of higher levels of management need more conceptual skills. Those who are at more direct supervisory management need more technical skills. But all the way throughout the organization, you need managers and leaders who understand human skills, who understand relationships. And so I think Christians get that because we have a theology of what does it mean to be made in the image of God. People that we're working with are bearing the very image of God. They have dignity and worth and value. And so we need to start relationship with those people in light of that kind of rich theology. And it means that we want to value those people and develop those people and create a healthy environment within which they can contribute their work as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's another great foundation. Foundation of flourishing, and also the foundation of the Imago Dei in every human being, and how in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, let's create humans in our image so that they may have dominion, rule over the rest of everything that God just created. It's just something to do with our work forever and ever and ever is to actually participate with God in making something of this world. That's our call, right?
It's a beautiful call.
It is. And so as an organizational leader, what I hear from the people in your book is if I'm looking at those peoples who are the followers of my leadership as people in and of themselves that are called to have dominion over their sphere, right? To be able to do the things that they are called to do so that they have meaning and purpose in their work, then it dignifies their work, but it also helps the organization. The organization actually flourishes when everybody is actually doing that.
That's right. That's right.
I love what you said earlier of work is not a direct result because of the fall. Work existed before the fall. We were we were given tasks and instructions and a to-do list, if if you will. Um, and I think that that's beautiful because as a young professional, when I graduated college and I entered the work field, I'll never forget. I have just kind of a funny story where I remember on a Friday night, my first or second week of full-time work, and I sat down exhausted. And I remember I told my dad, I said, "How do you do this every day for the rest of your life?" And my dad told me, he said, "Well, that's why it's important to enjoy what you do and to find your passion and the why behind what you're doing.
That's right.
And if you have that, then it's easier to wake up in the morning because you have a passion and a drive for what you do."
If I could even make a quick comment on that, one of the pathways of my own kind of research agenda, which came out a little bit in this book, but it's also just in some academic journal articles, is the idea of leader purposefulness. And I just along with you having an instinct on the importance of purpose and meaning in work in general, I think that logic applies to leaders who understand their sense of purpose and meaning. It was my sort of hypothesis, conviction that would influence the way leadership was done. But in some empirical studies on the matter, looking at leaders who had a clear sense of their own purpose and leadership, a sense of leader purposefulness, it demonstrated to be highly related to other organizational factors, employee job satisfaction, a sense of followers having higher degrees of organizational commitment, higher degrees of person organization fit. some very kind of standard organizational measures in terms of looking at the impact of types of leadership on followers. This dimension of purpose is sort of empirically validated as an important variable in terms of the way leaders hold themselves. So yes, we want that to cascade onto every person who's showing up to work or volunteer in an organization. But I think in some ways, a seed of that begins to sprout when leaders model that, and they themselves are owning that sense of purpose in their work. So I really resonate with kind of what even your dad was pointing you towards in that if you really get the why answer behind what we're doing, that's motivating for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very different for a leader to slap it on a poster on a wall versus model it in their day to day, how they take on meetings and talk to you and talk to clients. There's a clear difference between those two type of leaders.
And that leader creates a culture based on that purposefulness, right? A thriving organization has this healthy culture. People are meant to not only know what they're doing in their work and how they are to go about doing it, but that why is so important, right? They need to understand that why. Why am I doing this?
That's right.
Um, this is an issue of alignment. One business leader, you put it, find opportunities to connect every person's position with the big whys of the organization. And another said, make sure people understand the why behind their position so that they have ownership over the difference that they're making in the whole organization. So have you seen how organizational leaders are doing this and how they're measuring whether or not it's happening in their organizations?
Hmm. Yeah, there's certainly voices from the study connected to this book, Healthy Leadership for Thriving Organization, certainly validated the importance of getting to the why, understanding the significance of that. I think I would point to maybe some other sources that have thought about the measurement side of that. So one of my previous colleagues, Mark McCloskey, he talks about the kind of three driving questions that followers need answers from their leaders. And there's lots of questions that they're asking. He really hones in on three. He says, followers want to know, where are we going? How are we going to get there? And will you love me along the way? So it's kind of a question of vision, strategy, and work culture in a sense. But he has a model of leadership that kind of walks through some of the details of this. He calls it the 4R model, and kind of walks through the importance of relationships and roles, responsibilities, and results. But it's a tool that some organizations have used as a way to kind of do annual reviews of how are we doing organizationally. Yeah, particularly as they're kind of settling in on doing reflection on the results that come about in their communities. And of course, results is not just about metrics, numbers. It's about quantitative dimensions, qualitative dimensions, and of course, the story of both numbers and words is contextual, right? So it's quantitative, qualitative, and contextual ways of going through reviewing, reflecting upon what came about, and then refining things for future work in light of that. And that refinement then goes back through kind of the earlier stages of his model. We don't have time to unpack all of that model here, but that's one tool that has been used to kind of reflect on how are we doing and how can we improve things going forward. Some work that Mark McCloskey has done in that space.
The annual review is that when I'm going to find out whether or not I'm doing what I'm doing is, it's not the annual review it's the consistent relationship that I have with my supervisor, that he's consistently telling me, yes, that's the kind of thing we're looking for. Oh, do keep doing that. Oh, that right there is kind of dragging it down. Don't do that. And so that at the end of the year, it's not like, well, you suck. We also are so afraid of that annual review just walloping us.
Well, even just kind of on that front, I'm thinking of an example from my own church life where a lot of churches might have a Sunday a year where they say, hey, here's our big picture mission or values, and maybe kind of a way of framing some of those big picture ideas. But I was in a community group last night where we were reviewing a couple of our values and how that was being lived out in our community group and some of the aspects of kind of our lives. And as you're noting, right, it's not just those big once a year things, but how do you both informally and formally weave that into the normal rhythm of life in management relationships, but also in other organizational structures? I think that's really, really vital. You're putting your finger on an important thing there, that it can't just be the big moments. It's got to be the in the flow of life moments.
Yeah, and it somehow it has to be measured. That's just, especially church situations, nonprofits are just terrible at this. Having a nonprofit, that's me. Anyway, I mean, we just fly by the seat of our pants. How are we measuring exactly what we're supposed to be doing? And how do I know that this part of this organization is actually aligned with this overall purpose of the entire organization? There's misalignments all the time because people just kind of fly by the seat of their pants.
Yeah, from a leadership perspective, it certainly um, validates the importance of making sure purpose and mission and strategy, values and belief are somehow able to get into kind of a dashboard of some type that you can be looking at along the way, to keep those things in front of you, to have meaningful feedback that can inform decisions. Again, not just in that every 5 years or every year, but to be able to make tweaks along the way in light of progress on those various dashboard metrics.
Have you seen any dashboards out there that actually brings in values and beliefs and all those kinds of things alongside? Most dashboards in the secular world, they pretty much they gauge, are we being profitable? Are you doing the things that will make this company profitable? But a Christian organization, a leader organization led by a Christian, I should say, they have other metrics that they
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
measure on a dashboard. Have you seen that on dashboards?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple examples come to mind, and one might be more on sort of the values and beliefs side of things. The other might be on how are we practicing a focus on caring for people. So we can maybe chase down both of those trails. But I'll take the values and beliefs one for a moment. I don't wouldn't necessarily like have an immediate like here's a metric, a measure, but I have been a part of two organizations that in very intentional and meaningful ways use their values and beliefs for certainly hiring decisions. I'm thinking of one organization's that's a really strong emphasis within the hiring process, that it's not just do we have good rapport and chemistry, right? There's a sense of like, do we really align on the things that matter most to this organization in terms of values and beliefs? So that's
Mm.
one side, right? Of formalizing values and beliefs into intentionality with hiring processes, so that we're sort of starting on the right foot with commonality. But another organization, it was a university that I worked for previously, and I had administrator roles, manager type roles, and in the HR processes, we had very intentionally structured interview questions that were used at least in that once a year annual review process that were value based, right? It was creating intentional value oriented conversations of how a person's work performance is aligning with the values that are owned by that community. So it's not so much a measure, but I do think formalizing structures that don't just leave values and beliefs on a website, but bring them into meaningful conversation with employees, where there's back and forth. And this seems to be going well. Here's an area that maybe could use some attention in the next cycle. And whether those are quarterly reviews or annual reviews, just rhythms of weaving that into the formal processes, I think encourages natural informal conversations along the way in between as well. So those are a couple examples in terms of values and beliefs that have been helpful related to a couple organizations that I've worked with.
A lot of organizations, they have this like one sentence purpose statement or a mission statement and a vision statement. Purpose, vision, mission, vision, and all that, but they don't often in that very statement say along with these values, these beliefs.
Mm.
right in the statement, and then it just kind of like is assumed over here somewhere. We do that, don't we? Yeah, we believe that, and it's like if it's actually part of this purpose of we're doing this, why are we doing this? Because of that. What are we doing? And how are we doing it with these values?
It's it's interesting. I thought of a good example. My organization that I actually work for, they follow the system called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or
Mhm.
EOS.
Yeah.
So the Vision Traction Organizer, or what they call the VTO, is something that we review every quarter. When I first started, I was like, wow, every quarter we're just reading through the same thing every single time. And it takes you a little bit, but then it hits you. You're like, well, that's why, because otherwise we're kind of leaving the values on the website. We're leaving them on decor in the office, and that's it. And we're not talking about it. But instead, every quarter we read through all the values. We even pick one to say, like, how did someone show this past quarter? And you can call out other team members and say they did a really good job showing this value. And so it's been a really neat thing to watch, because yes, it has like the financials part of it, which they're very honest with us, and they say here's our 3 month goal, our 6 month goal, our year goal, and our 10-year target of where we want to be. So that's cool to see as someone who like is not involved necessarily in the finances. You at least see where are we going? Are we healthy?
Sounds like you're in a really healthy community in terms of keeping those conversations going in light of that entrepreneurial operating system. That's I'd be encouraged if I was in your shoes. So
Yes, it's very nice to see. Yeah, it's very nice to see, as well as our quarterly check-ins that we have with our direct supervisor. But yeah, they're very open about it, so it's very, very healthy there, which is great.
EOS is an entrepreneurial operating system that is a secular based thing, but a lot of companies have been able to tweak it to we got to include values and
mhm.
beliefs, but for a Christian organization,
Yeah.
it's really hard to take these secular tools and put them into a Christian organization. So the GPOS that we work with at Good Place Institute, it's the Good Place Operating System, and it's built from the foundation up. What does
Mhm.
it look like to be kingdom people? What does it
Mhm.
look like that we value people? What does it look
Yeah.
like that we are making good places, that our community's flourishing? And what does it look like to be regenerative financially so that we can do those two things, valuing people and making good places, more good places? That's why I love what Good Place Institute is doing is that this operating system measures all those things with dashboards and all this stuff. We need to be able to measure this stuff. That's what I've really become really convicted of because so many Christian organizations, what they're measuring are good things, important things. They have dashboards, but are they measuring the things that they say they really, really believe, right? This is, I'm a Christian and I want people to flourish, right? I'm a Christian and I want my community to flourish. Is that part of your dashboard, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's exciting to hear about this good place operating system that you're leaning into and providing for people. I think one of the realities that organizational leaders need to face is in a process like that, they need to be willing to look at things sort of in truth, right? Because when you are
Mm,
kind of leaning into data-based feedback, there has to be a willingness to say, hey, these values that we aspire to in the way we want to treat one another in our workplace, the
yeah.
the means by which we're approaching our work, we're not living up to the desired values that we have. And of course, the answer is not to get rid of values when there's a gap. The answer is to have that gap sort of become an aspirational value, like calling us forward to something better.
Yeah.
There's another tool that I'm sure many folks have in the audience maybe has heard about with the Best Christian Workplace survey.
Mm,
It's a similar kind of logic of saying we should be asking questions about employee experience of these elements that we really value. And I remember hearing a university president that the university had gone through some pretty rough years under some previous leadership. And I know the president have talked with him. One of his values, and I have this quote of his in the book, is take care of your people, and your people will take care of the mission. So he kind of has the logic of a servant leader baked into the way he thinks about things. But I heard him reflecting on using this survey information. And the first time they took the survey, because it hadn't been taken for many years because they got bad results, and so better just not have the results because it's bad news.
Right.
But to say we're going to reinstitute this, we're gonna get feedback, we're going to hear the actual story, right? For leaders that are healthy, reality is our friend, even when reality is challenging. So to be able to hear the truth, how are people really experiencing this work culture? But then that gives you actual information and detail and data to work with to kind of to have steps forward in terms of how values are being implemented in that workplace environment. It sounds like the tool you all use gives communities an opportunity to get that kind of real feedback and make real change in light of it.
Yeah, the best Christian workplace. Other organization I work for, CCO, we've been using that for over 20 years. Every year, well, everybody in the organization fills out this questionnaire, and the organization has often used that to make changes. And at times they have ignored things that should have been dealt with because of
Yeah.
that. And we've paid the price because of that. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. What was going on there? Let's go back and look at this. Why did we ignore this data? what,
Mm-hmm.
what was going on here? Why were our blinders on? And so what can we do in the future to ask those questions and to see those results and really make a change?
And that kind of requires courageous leadership
Yeah.
to be willing to look at things that sometimes aren't fun. It's easy to kind of plug our ears or close our eyes, but if there's a willingness to lean in and hear the actual story on the ground, that gives us something to work with to build a better workplace.
I think it's so challenging, yeah, for leaders to look at the hard truths because it's not fun. It's not fun for anybody, but especially when you're in charge, when these are, your people that you're leading, it's very difficult to call things out, call yourself out, and pause and reflect. Can be very challenging. So healthy leaders, they empower and equip their team members by delegating, and I feel like that word can be a hard truth for some leaders. But delegating real authority for decision making. You say that leadership requires the leader to take risks and to trust others. I was reading in Mark this morning, and I actually came across the passage where the story Jesus sleeping on the boat, there's a storm, and the disciples wake him up. And I did, I've often thought, I'm like, Jesus knew the storm was probably going to come, and, he knew he could just blink and it would be over. So why did he sleep, and why did, he kind of make a show of it to walk out and say, peace, be still? And I think in a way we can look at a lot of good leadership skills from Jesus, but that's just another instance where Jesus was kind of delegating and saying, you're my disciples. I want to give you, your own responsibilities and instructions. And obviously, I'm here to right the ship when we've gotten a little too far. In talking about delegating, how can a leader let go of control for the good of the people he or she is leading and for success of the organization? There's a lot of the term like micromanagement and things, and I think really good leaders can delegate really well. So, is there a secret to that? How do good leaders go about the delegation process?
Well, I think you're sort of implied in the way you're even framing the topic is a recognition that this is not always easy work for leaders, right? It does involve risk. It's not always easy to hand something over that you feel comfortable with to somebody who may be newer, just less experienced in working with a particular area. And so to have a little bit of understanding, first of all, that it's not just a cut and dry easy thing. But if we understand that leadership is, or at least involves, kind of in a central way, it involves valuing people and developing them. We're never going to get to the developing part without healthy delegation. We can kind of keep a very centralized hub and spoke approach to leadership and not delegate, but an organization is likely not going to grow, and the people who are working for that leader likely aren't going to develop and grow. So if we want to talk about models of growing organizations, expanding teams, developing people under our care, that necessitates delegation. Now, the sort of the interesting thing is, I would argue, and I do argue in the book, that delegation is both beneficial to the leader and the follower. It's beneficial to the leader in responsibility is kind of authentic, real responsibility is being handed over to other people. I think that takes somewhat of a burden off of leaders when it is done well. It can help to have a sustainable leadership model where one's not kind of perpetually in a burnout mode because they're taking on too much. But if they're willing to entrust to others, it also has the benefit of developing followers into future leaders and contributors in the community. So I think a person probably could get by as just a manager of individuals without delegating. But if somebody is stepping back, kind of the target audience for this book, someone stepping back and leading larger teams or divisions or an organization as a whole, I would just say you can't do that kind of leadership without working through others and in deep partnership with others, which means real work, real risk, real entrustment needs to be given over to other people. And I think it probably just takes kind of trying things out. It's not easy for people. So start with some small steps, hand over some work, allow time for yourself to get familiar with entrusting meaningful work to other people. And when that work is being entrusted to other people in a way that is both equipping them and empowering them, I think there's going to be lots of celebration to have along the way. And we're going to be healthier leaders, and we're going to have healthy emerging leaders because that delegation has happened. So I appreciate your focus even on raising that topic of delegation. I think that's central to healthy and empowering leadership.
I think, yeah, it also, for me, even when I'm delegated work from my direct supervisor or from somebody else, it brings you into the why even more because as you're working on it, you're like, oh, I get to see a little more into their world and I get to see why this is very important to them. So I want to do good work when I return this. And usually, hopefully, a healthy leader, when they hand it off, will express that importance, not out of like a fear of, hey, this is really important, you better do a good job, but instead of, this is the passion, the goal behind this project. So now I'm going to hand it over to you. And then when you accept that, you're kind of welcomed into that shared passion and shared vision that your supervisor, whoever it is, has. Now I've been in it for a couple of years, but especially starting out, the more I took on, the more I felt involved. And I think that that's very important for followers to, delegation is a great way to bring them into that process.
I called the three E's of leadership of organizational leaders. Most people, they only see the one E, the expectation. These are my expectations for you, and this is your job description. Boom, done. It's like you can't have expectation without empowering and equipping. The system is a failure if that's the case, you know? And so we often give job descriptions instead of creating a job description based on what we're trying to accomplish within that job description. This is how we equip and empower you to do your job. The job position, the description includes the expectations, but also the empowerment and the equipping.
Yeah, that's such a needed combo. When I talk to my students about at least the kind of the latter two aspects of that, I sometimes map it out as a little bit of a word equation. That if you have equipping without empowerment, that leads to frustration because you got people who feel like they're ready to do the job, but never actually given the keys to sort of drive the metaphorical car.
Right.
Uh, you could also have people that are empowered but not equipped. And I think that leads to failure a lot of times where you really haven't taken time to walk them through that developmental journey
Right.
of what success looks like in meeting that expectation. But of course, I'll throw in the F we've been talking about here, flourishing, right? When we equip well and then empower, I think that leads to flourishing followers. And so, yeah, that sort of 3E matrix that you're talking about, I think that's vital when we're on the ground seeking to be the kind of empowering leaders that help people flourish in their work.
So I think communication can be another hard truth for some organizations, especially with dealing with, heavy topics from leadership or difficult things. I've been a part of organizations that have gone through something traumatic, even. And so, but communication is so vital to a part of a healthy organization. I got my degree in communication, so I always pay attention to this in an
Yeah.
organization. I always kind of have my antenna up for what's being communicated from the top down, and from the bottom up. And so I wanted to ask you kind of what are the keys to good organizational communication? Maybe even in a sense of like, something large happen in the organization, and how do I communicate this information sensitively to everybody? And yeah, what hinders leaders from doing
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many themes that we could lead into. Let me start with one of the biggest communication messages I heard from the surveyed leaders, and then I'll kind of expand upon it. But I just heard from multiple leaders, even almost using the same phrase. So it's kind of like in the culture of multiple communities, where they said, clarity is kindness. And I just think that's powerful. So you talk about like when there's a crisis situation, or just run of the mill kind of setting a vision for where we're going, right? People just needing to know their normal work life or a crisis has taken place, sort of in equally in those kind of both situations for people to have a sense of clarity in what they need to do, what their role looks like in the organization, where the organization is going, what their place is in that community. Communication that creates clarity is a way to just sort of on the ground love our people, to provide kindness to our people. Another author I'm thinking of, David Horsager, who writes a bit about trust. He talks about people trust what is clear and they distrust what is ambiguous. Now, I would pair that with a number of other things. We need to not only be clear, we want to have a sense of conviction with what we're clear on. So, from a leadership vantage point, that gets back to what we were talking about earlier, with having a sense of purpose that's not just like, yeah, that's the purpose on the website, but this is actually what drives me personally as a leader. I care about this. This is something that authentically matters for me too. To have that kind of conviction paired with clarity, I think that's a real gift to the people that we're leading. So themes of trust. I might add to that themes of consistency and alignment. Are we being not only clear, but we're being consistent with that? And we're allowing it to be consistent in sort of a cascading way. So it's not just the one voice of a leader, but different kind of members in the organizational structure, different teams in the organizational structure are learning how to be kind of on the same message. It doesn't have to be like robotically scripted, but just the sense of they're in the same sweet spot of the message that needs to be communicated in that time. And so, I've heard Patrick Lenciani use that language before of cascading communication, where you almost want just sort of like true rumors to be going throughout the organization, that the grapevine communication is being consistent with sort of centralized communication. And that happens when we're being regular in our communication. We're looking for kind of multiple channels and pathways to communicate, and we have a consistent message that's connected with the clarity and conviction that we've had early on. In terms of what hinders it, it can be any number of things. I think that on a practical level, sometimes it's just the busyness of the work in front of us, right? When we're just trying to wing it, sometimes we miss what can actually be fairly straightforward to do if we're just intentional about it. I remember one leader that kind of had mentored me a number of years back. He led an HR department for a larger ministry. This was kind of before a lot of digital communication, and he had a post-it note on his phone in his office that just asked the question, "Who else needs to know?" And
Oh,
it was a
wow.
communication message for him to say, "Who am I assuming knows?" But I can't make that
Mhm.
assumption. I need to be proactive. I need to be intentional with these things. So I think a lack of intentionality might be one of the biggest hindrances. And then after kind of that being intentional, then we just need to lean into best practice, learning from people like you who've taken communication degrees and just thinking about some of those practices of effective organizational leadership and leaning into those with intentionality.
I mean, I was a communication major for a couple of years before I switched to business
Mhm.
in my undergrad. And so one of the things is like, who's the sender, who's the receiver, what are the things that
Yeah.
get in between, or do we have a feedback loop? All these things, it just seems silly, but it's like if you don't have that in front of you, and an organization has to consistently work through that all the time.
Yeah, and on that feedback point, I think our followers want to know that it's an authentic feedback loop, right? That if there is a comment going in that physical or virtual feedback box, right, is it just sort of heading off into oblivion, never to be addressed, or is there very sincere engagement with those things? Um, one of the presidents that I've worked with in the past, he had a line that I shared in the book that I just think is so powerful. He basically says leaders absorb pain and return grace. And it's this idea of like, is there a willingness to, again, in those feedback loops, take in, hear the information, make sure we're actually not ignoring genuine feedback. And so making sure that we are hearing from people. And if we're not, right, that could be a sort of a major red flag from a leadership and a communication perspective to open doors of trust so there can be authentic two-way communication that's taking place.
I was thinking another hindrance to it is just the leader's pride. You know, it,
Yes.
I had a friend who just told me about her situation in her school. The administration made changes and didn't share it with the teachers in the school, and then students found out and were asking the teachers, and the teachers like, what are you talking about? Right, I have no idea. So they go to the administration, they're like, oh, this was a need to know and you didn't need to know. It's like, what it's like, this is infuriating, right?
Mm.
What makes you think that you don't have to share that with us, right? It's a kind of a, we're the leaders. We made this decision, and you don't need to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a very tricky thing, and it's also, yeah, it is embarrassing for your team too when they're not informed on that and they hear it through a third party. That happened to me even at, a previous organization where it was there was something that came up and another team had told us, and as the communications team, we're like, oh, that's news to us, and we're the communications team, and we didn't even know uh, how to communicate it to anybody else. Um, every now and then I feel a conviction when I do this podcast, and today's conviction was definitely just the assuming out of other people. I think even I'm guilty of that, where I pass along work along the chain, and I just assume that they knew my thought there, they knew my intention, and then they come back and they say, "This doesn't make sense. Please help." And then I look at that and I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's because I didn't explain it to you because I wanted you to read my mind."
Organizations have cultures, usually for good or bad, and leaders have a lot of influence over that culture by the way they lead, by the things they do, the alignment, the communication, uh, the values and beliefs that are spread. These are the things that create the culture, and so over the years, that culture flows and develops, and everybody's kind of on board with that culture. But then the leadership leaves, and now you have to hire new leadership, and that leader or leaders have no connection with this flow of culture, and everybody else is like, what And it's leaders like, we're going to make these changes or these changes. And so it's very difficult for those in the organization who have a culture to be able to deal with that. I guess I have two questions. How do followers of that uh, honor the new leaders and try to help in that way? And if you're a leader going into a new organization, you're switching from one company to another. How do you develop an understanding of that company's that organization's culture?
Hmm. Well, some maybe kind of on both sides of that, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of culture is somewhat beneath the surface. So I think of
Yes.
the image of the iceberg, and however much I forget the exact percentages, what 80% of it's beneath the water, 20%'s
Mm,
above, something like that. Uh, that's a kind of a helpful metaphor sometimes when we think about culture, that there are visible aspects, and so for organizations, that might be some particular artifacts, visible dimensions of life in the organization. But those are often pointing to sort of deeper histories and deeper roots and maybe
mm,
unstated values and beliefs, or stated at times, but sometimes unstated assumptions that go along with that. I'll just give an example about a school that I was at and then a school that I came to. One school I was at, you never wore a tie around there. It was sort of just culturally, that just wasn't something that you did. Came to a new school. Nobody ever told me like you should wear a tie when you're teaching. But there's kind of you just look around and there's sort of the artifacts that say that's sort of a normal way that's life is done in a new kind of academic environment. And it's sort of having to go beneath the surface to try to read what is visible to get at what's less understood or assumed along the way. I think whether it's the leader coming in or the one who has been present, anytime there can be communication that is facilitated between those two groups, that allows for that sort of clarity as kindness uh, dimension of communication. So for a leader to not sort of come in guns blazing, assuming they know everything, but to be able to listen well, to learn well over time. Different organizations have different paces of change, but certainly like a church context. It's not wise for a new pastor to come in within the first few weeks and start changing everything. They need to come in with a really large set of ears, listening and learning as they go. They're going to bring in some new perspective that's helpful as well, but they need to come in with that sort of learning posture. And I think for most executives, and I remember hearing this from a gentleman that led a very large international airport. And when he brought in kind of a senior leader to work with him, he says, your job is to essentially make no change in the first 6 months. I want you to get on the ground, listen to people, learn your people, learn the culture, learn the expectations. As much as an organization can kind of provide healthy lead time for senior leaders to be learning well, that goes a long way. Sometimes an organizational context won't allow for that kind of on ramp, but listening well is going to help those leaders. And I think for those that are kind of in the follower role, it's helpful that there's a lot of literature on like what makes for effective, healthy followers in our day and age, and a lot of it connects to those who are kind of willingness to voice perspective, add value through what they have to share, but to do so in a manner that's communicating that they're part of the team, they are
mm,
supportive of that leader. And if there can be some who can be courageous followers to be able to share with the incoming leader some of these unknown elements and to verbalize those, not in a sort of an antagonistic way or a humiliating way, but in a I'm advocating for your success kind of way, that will go a long way, I think, to help in culture building between new leaders and longtime followers.
we really appreciate your taking time to be with us.
Well, it's been a really rich conversation. Appreciate the heart you bring to these themes and how you're caring for people in their real workplace environments. And it's a joy to kind of think together, to
Hmm.
talk together about what does it mean to really come alongside people, come alongside organizations, helping these places thrive and flourish and create really meaningful places for work to take place. So thanks for all you're doing in this space. And it was really a joy to join with you.
So that was a fascinating discussion.
It really was. I realized how passionate I am about organizational leadership. Even as
Right.
we got going, I was like, oh man, I could talk a long time about this. Just because it is such a passion of mine, because I have seen both the good and the bad and the ugly with everything. And I've been really encouraged by really good leadership. So to help kind of spread that awareness and a tool set that he offers in his book is very important.
Yeah. We talk about how we actually measure these kinds of things. And that's why I'm so excited about being a consultant with Good Place Institute, because we're offering an opportunity for Christian leaders to measure the things they think they value.
Yeah.
A lot of Christians, they've discovered and are using things like EOS, like what you're talking about, and it's but then they're like, okay, now I've got this secular tool. How do I make sure that people are thriving or they're flourishing? How do I make sure that we're taking care of them? How do I make sure that their families are healthy? And how do I make sure that we're taking care of our suppliers and our customers and our clients in such a way that they're thriving? How do I measure how we care for our community? How do we measure how we grow in a way that makes better places for people to live and work? That's a lot of stuff to try to measure that EOS isn't built to do.
Right. Yeah, it really is. Like it, and I love that you brought that up because there's so many leaders that are like, yeah, we do a great job in here and here and here. And I'm like, show me. No, literally show me
Hmm.
how you do a good job here because it's very simple to say we do a good job and to leave it on your website, like we mentioned, or have the decor around the office. But it's a whole other level of on paper, how are you doing this? What is the feedback you're getting? And how are you implementing that feedback? And
Yeah.
what does that cycle look like in your organization? And yeah, where EOS can focus a lot on the financials and some of the day to day, I think that focus on the people, the humanity of your business, focus on the people under you, and because they have a big impact on your day to day.
People go into business. I was a business major, and this is what I thought. I go into business so I can make money. That's what we do. That's what businesses do, right? And what's funny is that you on any business's website, except for some financial institutions, right? Their purpose statement never says, we're in the business of making this widget so we can make a lot of money. That's not what they say.
Right. Yeah.
What Justin Irving was saying is that organizations that do these things are actually very profitable. Why? Because the people are empowered and equipped to do their work in a way that dignifies their work. And so the whole company, whatever it's a corporation, nonprofit, church, whatever it is, the whole organization is healthy and healthy things grow.